What's going on, everybody? J-How here, and in this Diablo 3 Witch Doctor build, we're going to cover a Helltooth pet build. That's right, a Helltooth pet build, not a Zunamasa. Now, there is a no-set build that's out there with the Litany of the Undaunted, which is at the top of the leaderboards, but right behind it is a pet Helltooth build that is doing a lot of damage. It makes for a very different playstyle and can be a lot of fun. I'll cover the gear, the skills, and everything you need to know for this build to be able to go out there and do something a little bit different with some of the updates in patch 2.4 going into Season 5. For the skills, we're going to be looking at Piranhas with Pyranado, Soul Harvest with Languish, Wall of Death communing with Spirits, Gargantuan with Humongoid, Spirit Walk with Jaunt, Summon Zombie Dogs with Leeching Beast, and for your passives, Pierce the Veil, Midnight Feast, Spirit Vessel, and Grave Injustice. Now, this build is going to be based around mostly your Gargantuan or the Gargantuans that will be split up based on the gear that you're going to be using. Looking at your skills, Piranhas with Pyranado. This will allow for a decent amount of crowd control to be able to get enemies into a general area to help maximize your damage. It will also apply the 2-piece bonus from the Helltooth set to be able to do extra damage for your minions that are going to be in there, as well as apply that damage over time. Soul Harvest with Languish is going to play with another piece of gear that you'll be having, which we'll go over in just a moment. This is going to increase your toughness to allow you to push those high greater rifts. You'll be able to use this as needed to be able to get those stacks up for your armor. This is almost hard to pass up when you do push those high greater rifts. It's not unseeable to go without this, but it does add for a certain amount of toughness that you will need. Next up, your Wall of Death. The Communion with Spirits allows for a very wide area to be able to proc that 6-piece bonus of the Helltooth. Casting that and getting that 900% increased damage for 15 seconds for your zombie dogs and your gargantuans that are in there to do more damage, as well as even amplifying the piranhas and another Wall of Death, means that you're going to be triggering this, grouping things up with your piranhas, that Pyranado, to be able to have a general area to focus your damage, means that you'll be able to wipe out small groups of monsters very, very quickly. Adding that together with your passive of the Grave Injustice to be able to cast skills more often is very, very huge to be able to maximize all the damage that you can possibly do with this build. The Gargantuan with Humongoid means that this is going to be more cold skill oriented in that it's going to allow you to do a huge amount of damage. As you can see, the Gargantuan cleaves multiple enemies for 585% of your weapon damage. Being able to group those up with that Pyranado and then having those Gargantuans in there swinging away adds for a huge amount of damage. I say Gargantuans because it's going to be plural based on the gear that you're going to be using. The ring that we'll talk about here in just a moment will help clarify the plural for the Gargantuan. Spirit Walk with Jaunt, because you're never going to be in the right area, especially with this build. It does require you to be close enough to proc your Grave Injustice, but you'll also want to rely pretty heavily on your pets to be able to do most of the damage and do most of the tanking. But you still will need to get in and out of danger as needed, so Spirit Walk with Jaunt allows you to get to a great distance if needed. Your Summon Zombie Dogs with Leeching Beast. Your Zombie Dogs will do more damage, especially with the passives and the gear that you'll be using. But having the Leeching Beast in there mean that they'll be able to keep you alive as well. Your Zombie Dogs heal you for 100% of your life on hit with every attack. So survivability is help amplified here with the Leeching Beast on Summon Zombie Dogs. Now, since you won't be using as much mana and it's not that big of a deal, Pierce the Veil is really good in that your damage is increased, but your mana costs are also increased. It's a nice trade-off to have extra damage there at the expense of mana, which isn't as important with this build. For your next passive, Midnight Feast, the damage of your zombie dogs and gargantuan is increased by 50%. This is a huge damage buff, especially to your gargantuans, but it also, of course, helps with your zombie dogs. It also allows you to have one additional zombie dog to be able to have extra tanking and more positioning opportunities. Spirit Vessel is also important in the sense that you're probably going to have some damage taken at some point, especially with this setup. So allowing yourself that extra life every 60 seconds is very important with Spirit Vessel. Next up, Graven Justice. This is going to help you have cooldowns very, very rapidly, especially if you're staying at the right range. Being able to chain your skills back to back to be able to increase your damage is very important, so making sure your positioning is right with Graven Justice is very important. Now, if you have a good Hellfire Amulet with any one of those passives on it, or even one with Swampland Attunement, that's going to help your toughness. So being able to get one of those passives on a Hellfire Amulet can help you out, because a 5th passive will go a long way with this build. Now, taking a look at the gear, you're going to need the full 6-piece Helltooth complement, which says that on your 2-piece, enemies hit by your primary skills and a lot of the skills that you'll be using become slowed, getting applied with necrosis, and then they take an additional 1500% weapon damage every second, and taking 20% increased damage from all sources for 10 seconds. So right away, you're putting on a nice damage over time, a nice dot, and then you're also amplifying the damage that's going to be coming in the moment soon after. Now, playing into the toughness side, the 4-piece bonus is strictly a 50% damage reduction for 10 seconds after you apply necrosis, which is applied on that 2-piece bonus. Looking at the 6-piece bonus, after casting Wall of Death, gain 900% increased damage for 15 seconds to your primary skills, your Zombie Dogs, Gargantuan, Piranhas, and Wall of Death, all of those skills that you'll be using. So 900% increased damage bonus, especially with the Gargantuans that are going to be coming out that we'll talk about in a second. That's going to be doing a lot of damage in there in those key areas with the skills that you'll be using. For the weapon, a Sacred Harvester is a really good option here. You can go other directions, but as mentioned, at high greater rifts, you will need the extra toughness. This means that Soul Harvest will now stack up to 10 times. Now, getting that extra stacks means more damage mitigation, which is why we chose the rune that we did in the skills section. Moving directly over to the bracers, Lakumba's Ornament. This is another item that's going to be very important. The secondary for this, for the legendary, says reduce all damage taken by 6% for each stack of Soul Harvest you have. So having that stacking up to 10 times, especially with the rune that's already on there, means even more damage reduction. So we wanted to get into that to go and explain the reasoning for that Soul Harvest pick. This will be necessary at really high greater rifts. If you're chasing lower greater rifts, you might be able to choose something more damage oriented to where toughness isn't as important. Looking at your offhand, Henry's Perquisition, which is the cat, means that you're going to have even more damage reduction, and this is very important. It says, the first time an enemy deals damage to you, reduce that damage anywhere between 60 to 80% and charge the enemy for 3 seconds. That's another huge bonus, and one that you'll probably need. So being able to get that damage mitigation in there between your weapon, bracers, and offhand is where it's going to be at. Now, getting into the more damaging side of things, we'll take a look at the rings. The Short Man's Finger. This is the one that says Gargantuan instead summons 3 smaller Gargantuans, each more powerful than before. This is where a lot of damage is now going to come out from your Gargantuans. They're already doing more damage from the Helltooth set, and then combining this with this ring means that they're going to be clearing out a huge amount of enemies, especially with that cold rune that's going to be cleaving. So having that extra damage in there is very important and paramount to this build. Coupling that with the Tall Man's Finger, which has actually been around for a while, Zombie Dogs instead summon a single Gargantuan dog with more damage and health than all other dogs combined. So coupling that, we talked about earlier, having those extra dogs, the Tall Man's Finger you can go away from, but to have that extra damage there, especially with the passive that we chose, is going to be huge for the damage that you're doing. If you want to go for another ring here to be able to have those 4 zombie dogs, that's another option as well. But to be able to do maximum damage, this is going to be the way that you go. So depending on your playstyle, you may choose not to use this, or you may choose to. Most of your damage will be coming out from the Gargantuans, but supplementing even more damage with that single zombie dog can be even more important. As I mentioned, having a good Hellfire Amulet with one of those passives that we talked about in the skill section is very, very important. If you don't have a good Hellfire Amulet, pretty much any amulet will work here so long as it has a socket, crit damage, and crit chance on it. Now, there's an alternative you can use for setting this build up. You can go with a full 6-piece Helltooth and just equip all 6 pieces. Or you can find a way to work in the Mask of Jerem, which will either be worn or in the cube. This increases your pet's damage by up to 100% and is going to be necessary to the build. Now, the way that I set it up when I was working on the PTR is that I wore the Mask of Jerem and then kept the Tasker and Theo gloves in the cube. One way or another, having those in there, as well as a Ring of Royal Grandeur to hit that 6-piece bonus with the Helltooth, means that your pets are going to attack harder and faster, which is really important to the build, especially those gargantuans that are in there. The harder they hit and the faster they hit, it means the more damage that they're going to do, especially with that 6-piece bonus coming in there from the Helltooth. For the belt, there's two options. You can go with the Witching Hour, which means that you're going to have the crit damage and attack speed, which means it's going to play very well into your pets, or you can go with the Belt of Transcendence to be able to summon those sycophants. Now, that will help in terms of positioning and tanking in certain moments, but if you're looking to push the high grade of rifts, you might opt for a Witching Hour. It does mean that you're a little bit more vulnerable, especially without a lot protecting you, but if you can get in the right moment, get in the right rift, then you'll find that you'll be able to stay alive just fine with a lot of the stuff that we already talked about. Else you might opt for a Belt of Transcendence here. For the cube, having a furnace means that you're going to be doing a huge amount of damage to elites. This is going to be your weapon choice in Kanai's cube. Looking at the armor slot, now, we already talked about a couple ways you can do this. You can either go with the full 6-piece Helltooth and then put a Mask of Jerem in the armor slot and leave it at that. Or you can wear the Mask of Jerem, use the Ring of Royal Grandeur in your jewelry slot, and then put Tasker and Theo into the armor slot in your cube, or vice versa with the Mask of Jerem, whichever one is rolled better. So you have a couple of options in terms of how you want to build the Helltooth set. I tend to prioritize making sure to have Tasker and Theo and Mask of Jerem, which means that I have to opt for the Ring of Royal Grandeur. You can certainly go the other way and just keep the Mask of Jerem in the cube and not worry about having Tasker and Theo at all. So there's a couple of options you can go there. So if you decide to go full 6-piece Helltooth and only the Mask of Jerem in your cube, then you would go a Convention of Elements in that jewelry slot. Else, if you mix and match, you will need that Ring of Royal Grandeur in that jewelry slot there in Kanai's cube. For the legendary gems, we're going to be kicking it old school with the Enforcer, which means that it increases the damage of your pets, and your pets take less damage. It's mostly about the damage here, so having the Enforcer there is a great start, especially with this setup and those gargantuans in there. Next up, the Esoteric Alteration. Again, toughness is going to be in question, and this is a little bit of an acquired play style. The Esoteric Alteration allows for a bit more survivability for you to be able to get in there into those dangerous areas to help do plenty of damage. Lastly, the Bane of the Trap. Because you'll be doing so many different crowd control elements in there, Bane of the Trap is just going to increase your damage and is an obvious choice here for that other legendary gem. So to recap, there are a few ways you can build this. It's mostly around making sure you can stack your Soul Harvest stacks, and then getting in there, applying your Wall of Death, getting your Pyranado down, grouping things up, and then making sure that your Gargantuans are cleaving as many enemies as possible. You have enough damage mitigation to step into Greater Rift 60 pluses pretty easily. Beyond that, it takes the right rift, the right positioning, and then a lot of testing to get used to those higher Greater Rifts and the amount of damage that you'll be taking on. Putting all of that together to be able to mitigate a lot of that damage will make for an easier transition. This might not be for everybody. Again, there is another build out there that requires no set. So if you're looking for something different, that will be coming available soon as well. But if you're looking to try out this new Helltooth pet build, this is the way to do it with a few options that fit your play style for more survivability or for a little bit of fun, and to just see what it's like on the new end as opposed to using something other than Zunamasa. The number one thing about most builds, and this one in particular, is positioning. For extra damage, more survivability, it makes more sense to be in those key areas, so make sure that you're pushing into the right area, getting your monsters grouped up in the right way, and then making sure to see if you need that extra tanking from those fetish sycophants, or whether you're just fine, and the preferred way to just dive right in, make sure you have enough stacks, and then stay on the move. Your pets are going to do the damage. You need to stay alive. So that's it for this Diablo 3 Witch Doctor build for patch 2.4 and Season 5. If you like the build or you like the video, feel free and hit that like button below, because that's always appreciated. And if you're looking for more Diablo 3 or other gaming content, feel free and subscribe as well. As always, I appreciate you guys watching. Till next time, happy hunting. See you again.